No, are we okay to roll here?
Yep, all good.
Great. Okay, well, thank you. And once again, welcome. This is day 2 of the Strabospot workshop for metamorphic petrology. Here's the people who you'll be hearing from, a significant proportion of us today in one form or the other. You'll also be hearing from Alan Glasner talking about the Strabo tools later today. And we're going to be going over some of the vocabulary that Adrian and Jade Star contributed to. So the logistics for this is please turn off the video. We're doing that because of low bandwidth areas, such as my house. Please mute, except for the break. Use the chat window for questions. Also, people are using the Google Docs. I'll get to that in a second. So, but don't use that during the webinar because we can't basically keep track of both. And the agenda for this meeting, as always, is in the PDF. And we'll have a break in the middle. Here is the Google Docs. The Google Docs is really useful to read even if you're not having questions yourself, because people raise issues that are useful. So I would encourage you to look at that. From the Google Docs, we will make a frequently asked questions from that, so you can access those later too. All right, so here's what we're doing today. I'm going to get us going for 5 minutes, and then I'm going to talk about sketching for 10 minutes. Nick's going to talk about importing Basemaps, and then Stacia is going to give us how she actually did a project 1 week ago in the Ruby Mountains. Frank's going to talk a little bit after the break about his work with the Strabo system. Nick is going to show you Strabo 2. Strabo 2 is going to be part of the discussion on Thursday. Alan's going to show you a freestanding program called Strabo Tools, which uses the standardized format for the Strabo database. And then I'll just quickly talk about tasks for tomorrow at the end of the day. All right, we are coming up on the opportunities for feedback. So tomorrow we're going to start with a community discussion about how we can improve the vocabulary and workflow. So as you start your project later today, keep track of things that you're like, I didn't quite know what this meant. Oh, you know, it would be really better if we did it this way, and so forth. And then finally, on day 4, on Friday, we're going to hear your project. So we're going to basically have a couple slides from each project, just not to sort of give the background, but more how you use the Strabospot data system. And then we're going to end with a group discussion about how you want to move forward with this Strabo micro. So that's going to be presented on day 3 after the discussion, and then we'll move forward because I suspect that the micro version using micrographs is going to be very important for this community. All right, so now we can start talking about projects. So we have the ability to provide $250 per project for the data to get uploaded in Strabospot. This is the cache for data project, as someone has called it. We did not originally budget for this. But NSF program directors of a level, unfortunately, you have to be a U.S. institution. We looked into doing this for foreign participants, and we tried to push a little bit, but we couldn't do it. So I should also say that faculty are encouraged to work with graduate students on this way, or maybe it's really vice versa. We don't want to have to make a comment about that one way or the other, but basically work together to do that. And if there's going to be more than one project from a single institution, so for instance, if 4 people are here from a single institution, that's no problem. We can make 2 projects, but just contact us to make sure that we can budget correctly for that. All right, so as I move over my next PowerPoint to sketching, does anybody have any questions, or are there any questions so far? Is there anything in the chat, Noah, that we can answer, or are we good to go so far?
You're good to go.
Okay. You just have to wait for me to technically fool around for a little bit. Okay, so I'm now going to go through sketching. Sketching is one of the strengths of the Strabospot system because it allows you to annotate maps, annotate figures, or just free sketch. And you can do this in the field while you're looking at things, and it saves automatically. So there's 4 ways you can sketch in Strabospot. One way is to use the photo that you take as an image base map. Alex talked a little bit about that. I'll just add a few sentences to that. The second thing you can do is draw on paper and then upload images. If you want really detailed sketches, this is the way to go. The 2, I would say, more powerful ones are using the sketch tool in Strabo. Although it's very basic right now, that will likely change. And what we mostly do, the people who are using Strabo routinely, is we use an add-on sketching program, something like Sketch, but there are many others, and integrate your annotated photos through the photo roll, because both Strabo and Sketch use the photo roll. So we're going to go through these one by one. So one option here is to just add a line or a polygon as a spot. So here's a picture I took. This is again from Baraboo. It doesn't matter. If you hold down the line tool, you don't have to do segments. You can do curvy lines. And so this is what I've done, and I've done it in the air just so you could see it. So you can add information to that spot, or you can just have that spot as a decoration, basically, to delineate a contact or a geologic feature you want to see. So that's using spots in image-based maps to annotate a photo. The second option, particularly if you're a good sketcher, is to take the sketch to do it on paper. Then you take a picture of that sketch using the iPad that you're using or the external device. And then you just go in, you click the add image, which is in below, and you just say that it's a sketch. You say it's okay, and then it's automatically uploaded. If you then choose to use that as a base map, you can do that. And you, for instance, if you were interested in taking samples in specific places, such as the A and B here shown, you could use this as an image base map. So that's, again, a pretty powerful technique. And this is an example of doing that. So once you've loaded in the sketch, you would name it and then basically click on the add images base map switch. Option 3 is really simple, which is if you go to images for any number of tabs and you have a add image from file, but you also have this sketch tool. So I've blown that up. It's circled in red. You can hit sketch. And what brings up is a blank sheet of paper that has 2 tools. It has a pencil and an eraser. And you can draw what you would like using that. There's only one width, so it's for very simple diagrams. You can sketch also directly on a photo, which is what I'll show next. So if you have a fold, for instance, you can use the fold as an image base map, and then you have up in the right hand, once again circled, image properties. You can choose the pencil and you can draw out the axial plane of the fold. So you just go to images, you choose the more button, you choose image properties, and then you choose the pencil. So it's relatively straightforward to do that. The tool is pretty rudimentary. So if you use the eraser tool, so I just made a bunch of mistakes below just to show you what happens, it doesn't restore the image. So the easy thing to do is just to start over if this happens. The last thing, and the thing we mostly do as practitioners, is we use an external program to sketch the photos. We use Sketch in general, or I do anyway. They both use the camera roll on the iPad, so it makes sharing easy. So here's an example of working through that. You take a picture in the field, You then go into Sketch, you open Sketch, you say choose the camera roll, which is the top one here, choose camera roll, 400 pictures. You then open that, and then you use all the high quality ways of doing that. So the colors, line thicknesses. I think you can see there's 3 lines here. There's a thin red one, a thicker yellow, and then a thickest blue, basically showing you the trend of the ripples. So that this is something you can easily do. And then you mark that up, you save it back to the photo roll, and then you go back to Strabospot, you go to the spot it is, you import the image, whether it's a photo or a sketch, you can just call it what it is, and then you import it from the photo roll. So it says camera roll import. I did this and it took 15 seconds to do. I just was curious at how much time. So it's relatively straightforward to do that. And what's great then is you have both the actual image in Strabospot and then you have the annotated image of the same thing, which is a pretty powerful technique. Okay, that's all for sketching. There are likely going to be better options in the future, and that's because we have gone to just the iOS approach at this point. And so I think in the future, we can look towards better functionality there. But in the meantime, you can pretty much do anything you want with one of these external drawing programs like Sketch, and they also download for free. All right, with that, I'm going to pass it over to Nick, and I will answer any questions. That come up.
All right. Should I just go ahead?
Yeah.
Or, okay. All right, so you can see my screen, I hope.
Yes, we can.
Great, so I am gonna talk about importing Basemaps and getting them so that you have them out on your device in the field. And in summary, there are essentially 3 ways to create and access custom Basemaps in the Strabo app. And those 3 ways are Map Warper, which is an online georeferencer, so it accepts any image type or PDF. You can upload it and georeference using the online tool. Mapbox is a free online map builder tool. It's highly customizable. You can upload shape files and overlay them on geotiffs. It's a very, it's kind of a studio tool that you can use, but one of the big drawbacks is that it is kind of time consuming and does have a steep learning curve. And then the third way is that we've built a kind of a native map management tool called Strabo Maps that's on the desktop on your Strabo account. And it does basically one thing, which is upload geotiffs. So images that have already been georeferenced. And a big advantage is that those maps are then stored on your Strabospot account, so you can access them across projects. And you know, I've used this a lot, and I just georeference anything using my favorite GIS like QGIS or ArcGIS. So I'll just briefly show you what each of these tools looks like. So Map Warper, it's a pretty simple online tool. You create a free account and you can hit upload map, and it lets you put in some metadata. And it's really best for quickly georeferencing things like scan topo quads or other non-georeferenced maps from publications. And then you get a permanent key that you can use in Strabo. Mapbox, I've used this in situations where I had a bunch of shape files that I needed. Like I did a project where there was Aboriginal heritage protected lands that I wasn't allowed to sample from. So I overlaid that on a map so that I could clearly see those in the field. And Strabospot My Maps, there's a limit of 1 gigabyte files, but it's perfect for drone imagery or DEMs, products that come pre-georeferenced that you can just quickly upload. And the basic workflow for getting any of these from any of these tools working in Strabo is that each of these products create a unique ID that you copy, and then in the Strabo app, so this is a screenshot of Strabo on an iPad, under the Basemaps section, you can just hit add a custom map, select the map type, and then you paste the ID into Strabo, and then the map will appear. And I'll show you how that works in a second. So I'm going to stop sharing this. I'm going to switch over to my iPad. So I am on the just web browser of the iPad on my Strabospot account logged in. And I'm just going to demo how Strabospot My Map works. The other ones you can explore on your own. But in your Strabospot account, under Account, you can hit My Maps. And it takes you to a page, and you can see I already have a few maps that I've uploaded. If you want to upload a new map, it takes you to a page where you can upload a file, and file upload can take kind of a long time. So I'm actually just going to say cancel, and I've already uploaded the file that I want to show you. So I'll hit back, and it's this dm.tif at the top. So to get it into Strabo, it's as simple as hitting this little copy to clipboard icon. And you can see that's been copied to my iPad clipboard. And then I will switch over to the Strabospot app. In the top left corner, hit the 3 bars, go to down under the Maps section, Other Basemaps. And here I have a custom base map already done, but I'm going to hit the plus at the upper right corner. And I get an opportunity to say what type of map I'm importing. Well, it's a Strabospot My Maps. I'll give it a map title, DEM Hillshade. And in the Strabospot map ID, I'm just going to copy, or I'm going to paste from the clipboard. And I have some other options. I can set it as an overlay. So I can set a kind of semi-transparent version. I'm not going to do that for this example. And then I just hit the check mark. And now it's in my other base maps. And to confirm that I've actually downloaded, I go to this main map. I still just see the normal topo map, but under the layers button, now DEM Hillshade is one of the options. And you can see there, it's all loaded up. So using Strabospot My Map, it's in a matter of just a few minutes. And just like any other map, I can go to the top right corner and I can save map for offline use. And I can save this for going into the field. So I won't go into how this works, but it's pretty self-explanatory going through, and we have some YouTube videos for how exactly to save maps offline. All right, are there questions about that? That's all I have for offline or getting custom maps to be on your iPad or device.
We have plenty of time because Nick and I have gone under time. So if you want to unmute and ask a question, you're welcome to do so, or you can type it in.
Hey, this is Drew. I got a quick question. And sorry if you said this and I missed it, but right now, is there any way to have multiple layers active offline, multiple base map layers active, and you can toggle the transparency of one or the other?
Sure, that's a good question. Right now, so overlays cannot be downloaded for offline use, is my understanding. If anyone correct me if I'm wrong about that, but that's my understanding. So right now in the field, you can download multiple maps for offline use. but you're kind of stuck toggling between them, not overlaying them directly.
I think that's correct.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Someone's asking, does the size of the base map affect field usage? In other words, can Strabospot handle large files in the field? Yes, and the way that this is done is through tiling. So if I were to download this map for offline use, rather than saving just one gigantic image that loads every time I view it, it segments the image into lots of tiles that it downloads, and then at any point in time, depending on my zoom level, it will load different tiles. It's a very lightweight and kind of standard way to deal with maps. So yeah, you can download very large files. It's kind of limited by the capacity of your device.
Nick,
And
when
I
wrong?
skipped one.
Yep.
Oh, go ahead.
No, that's exactly
Oh,
what I was going to say.
Yeah, I had scrolled up. So can Strabospot directly read shapefile, or do you need to convert shapefile to a TIFF first? It can read shapefiles, however, not as a base map. So you can read in shapefiles if they are attributes, like if you have a shapefile of faults, you can upload that and import them as line spots. But as far as a base map goes, the way you really want to do that is through the Mapbox tool, because they can overlay shapefiles on whatever types of maps that you want. So you can create a tiled map that you can download for offline use, but do it through Mapbox.
I got a question here. This is Jochen.
Yep. Go ahead, Jochen.
Yeah. So when you upload or import your base map after you rectified it, it also gives you the option to make it public. But as far as I remember from the structure session 2 weeks ago, I was told that any map that we sort of import, we cannot actually, it won't show up for all the others. So in the public, so I'm a bit confused now.
Yes. So if I understand your question correctly, you're asking about the fact that if I go to this page, then there's a button on against each of the maps that says make public.
Right.
Yes. So what this public thing does is it allows you to share this key with other users of Strabo.
Okay.
So it makes the key public so that this DEM is accessible by other people if they have this key. But it is not. It's different from what we were talking about a couple weeks ago.
Okay, so it's not automatically visible to anyone who's searching my data.
That I've never explored that question.
And I don't know the answer either.
Okay, so they have to have the person has to have the key.
I think so.
Okay,
but I'm not
That's
sure.
all. Yeah, fine. That's all. Thank you.
If it's okay, I think Nick can probably answer the other question that's available, and we should probably go to Stacia at this point to have her give an overview of how to use this in the field.
Okay.
So Nick, you'll have to stop sharing, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, it's all good. And if you could answer Pablo's question, that'd be great.
Yes, I will. Yeah.
All right. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of how we use Strabospot in the field a couple of weeks ago. We were out in the Ruby Mountains East Humboldt Range, and hopefully you all had a chance to watch the video that just gave kind of a short introduction to this metamorphic core complex. And just to quickly highlight, Drew is the person doing his PhD work here, or at least part of his PhD, and he helped me put together some of the slides that were in that video as well as in this talk. So I said this at the end of the video, but just to reiterate, the main ways that we were using Strabospot were for describing the outcrops, just the general lithologies that were present, as well as the fabrics. We also use Strabo for measuring foliation, lineation, fold axes, as well as dike orientations. And then within spots, taking photos, as well as documenting the samples and giving descriptions for those samples. So just a few things before we actually went out in the field, things to keep in mind, and kind of emphasizing what Nick just went over in that previous talk, is really loading in those maps and other data sets, making sure to download them. And if you are going somewhere where you're out camping the entire time and doing backpacks, making sure that you have plenty of power banks available, especially if there are, you know, multiple iPads in use. But just to give you a sense for the work we did, Drew had put together multiple geologic maps for different quads within the metamorphic core complex and had georeferenced those. And so just as Nick was showing, we uploaded those on the web kind of account into My Maps, and then transferred those onto the different iPads. And so as they were just talking about, when you first put them in and you're online, you do have the option of making them as overlays. And just as a reminder, you know you're online if you go in the upper right-hand corner and you'll see that green dot that's indicating when you're online, and it'll go red when you go offline. So in this case, it was kind of nice because we had both geologic maps, and then the other thing that we loaded in advance via shapefile was Drew had gone through all the literature and made a file that contained all the sample localities for previous thermobarometry samples. And so he entered in a shapefile that contained kind of the following information. And again, this is all through the online account, where it had the sample name, the assemblage, its location, as well as pressure and temperature data. And so once you enter in that shapefile, Strabospot wants you to define kind of where it should be placed within the program. So just kind of jumping to the next screen, here is the drop-down menu of the options you have. And basically it's all the options that you already see in Strabospot. So certain things like the sample name are easy, where you can just make that another spot name. Obviously latitude, longitude has an appropriate place. And then for things like the pressure and temperature data, Drew just added that into one of the notes sections and just kind of remembered where he had put it so he could refer to that back in the field. And so then it's quite nice because when you have that information, they just appear as additional spots kind of along with the spots that you're entering as you do your work in the field. So if you have that information in advance, you just want to make sure to get it organized into that shape file before you are traveling out into the field. And then the other key thing is making sure to save all your maps for offline use. And remember that you're going to have to save each type of map separately. So it does take a decent amount of time. And especially I can say I was working with 2 iPads. One was about 5 years old and it did have problems with this and kept crashing. And so it just went really slowly, versus the newer iPad did fine, but it does take a long time to kind of add all of these in and make sure that you're happy with them. And so that would be the other thing that you'll want to do is while you're making those maps or saving them for offline use, is just make sure when you're done to take your iPad offline, essentially just turn off the Wi-Fi, make sure you have this red circle up in the top corner, and just cruise around in your field area and make sure those maps are at the quality that you want and that they're covering the area that you will need for your field work. And again, this is all kind of emphasizing where we were working in a place where we weren't going to have that internet connection very easily for a week or so. So in the end, what we saved, or what I saved on my iPad, was both the satellite images as well as all of those geologic maps that we had loaded in there, and just 2 views of the same area, and you can see some of the spots that were later placed when we were in the field on top of those images. All right. So that was kind of what we did beforehand, and then either you can do this before or once you're in the field is next deciding on what tabs we actually want to be working with in the field. And as a reminder, this is under what Doug Walker always refers to as the hamburger menu, the 3 horizontal bars. And then if you go under project and the preferences within there, this is where you can turn on these different tabs. And just as a reminder, to me, this is one of the nice things about Strabo is you can have as few or as many of these turned on as you want. So again, depending on your workflow, you can choose what options you would like to see for your individual spots. The other thing below kind of all those options that was mentioned yesterday are the naming conventions. And so this is just handy to put in a prefix labels for both the spots and then perhaps also your samples, depending on how you label those. All right. So once you're out in the field, the next thing you'll want to do once you're at a location where you'd like to place a spot is to find your location on the map. And this is pretty easily done by going up in the top right and just hitting this little dial, location dial feature. And that will automatically find your location. One thing I found just as a point of caution is that it doesn't immediately jump to your location. Sometimes it seems like it does, but I found that it took, I don't know, upwards of even 30 seconds to locate. So just something to mention to students who, my personal experience is sometimes they just trust the computer and won't double check the satellite image or the topography to make sure that it's actually placed you in the right spot. So just check on that. The other thing was Drew was working with a Bluetooth GPS and did say that it was much faster to find his location. So you might want to consider having one of the Bluetooth GPSs there and connecting your iPad with that. Once you're satisfied that you are in the correct location, then you can place your spot. And then kind of the normal menu comes up that we've seen in multiple presentations now, where you can describe your spot location. One thing again, once you're happy with that location, you'll want to hit this set to my location. And that will allow the GPS accuracy as well as the altitude fields to automatically populate. And that's the only way that material will show up is if you hit this set to my location button. So within this area is where you can start to add in information about your geologic units. You also have a notes section, which for me, I kind of treated a bit like a conventional field notebook and just would type in various notes. So those notes appear within this kind of overall spot menu, and then they also will appear as a separate tab, this notes tab up here. And so you can add those notes in either location. Okay. So I'm just going to go through a couple of examples of individual outcrops where we place spots. The first one is shown here by the star, and it's in the Myelinite zone on the west side of the Ruby Mountains. This is just at the entrance of Lamoille Canyon, if you're familiar with the area. And so in this locality, all of the rocks are highly myelinitic. They're also very thinly interlayered with a variety of rock types. In this case, we saw quartzites, marble, calcsilicates, and all of these rocks were also injected by layer parallel, strongly deformed leucocratic material. And so here we're looking at the IgMet tab and just describing the petrology that was observed. And so this is one thing to know is that you can either use this tab to describe a single rock or you can describe multiple rocks within that locality. For me, I basically skipped over the protolith and the information about the intensity of the metamorphism because everywhere we were working, it was always upper amphibolite facies conditions for the most part. And so I just kind of knew that about the field area. So this is kind of the parts where you can ignore parts of Strabo if you don't need to type those in. And just to give you a sense of what the rocks actually look like, because I know we're focusing on an app, but it's always nice to see rock pictures. Here's those different rock types where there was this very fine-grained kind of black rock. I assume it was pretty biotite rich, but it was so fine-grained it was hard to tell in the field. And then above it are marbles. And then just another picture of some marble that had a very thin quartzite layer in it that was strongly deformed. And so these are just a couple of the field photos that were taken at this spot. So now just looking at that images tab. And so you can see how you can just take as many field photos as you want to connect in with that spot. You have an image name as well as an image description that you can fill in for all of these different pictures. So just a nice way to kind of document what you're seeing at that outcrop. And then of course in this area, we were quite concerned with the fabrics. So putting in a lot of information under that fabrics tab and under metamorphic fabrics. So in this case, mainly documenting that myelonetic foliation. And remember, you can have the minerals described down here that define that foliation. So of course, the quartz and quartzite, calcite, and the marbles, it's pretty self-explanatory in these rocks. And then below that, just further down under the fabrics, we can add in kinematic information. So in this case, you could see sigma class within the outcrop. And those sigma class consisted of plagioclase, and they were defining top to the west and sinistral fabrics. So all of this information can be easily added in under that fabric tab. So then going to the orientations and actually taking measurements of these fabrics, I had to switch over to the orientations tab at the top here, and then taking foliation as well as lineation measurements. And the nice feature of you can take that foliation and then click on the add an associated linear feature so that those two are interconnected and you know that that lineation was in that foliation plane. All right. And then once you take that orientation measurement, if you go back to the main maps, this is where you will be able to see that that information automatically will plot onto your map. So it's very nice to kind of get a regional sense of how the fabrics may be changing or the orientations of those fabrics are changing. If you don't want to see that information, you just click on the layers options, and this is where we had all those base layers in our maps, but this is also where you can choose if you want to see your spots on your map, and then underneath the spots whether you want to see orientation information. So you can always toggle these off if that's not information that you want to be on your map. Okay. So then just one other example, in this case from the southern end of the East Humboldt Range, and here we're more focused on the petrology of the rocks. In this locality, there's abundant lenses of metapelite that are found among mostly quartzite. And so just one example of an outcrop here with Drew steadily working away in Strabospot and taking notes and measurements within there. And so in this area, we were really interested because in some of the peelite samples, you could see kyanite, whereas in others, it appeared that the kyanite was being replaced by silmonite or had been replaced by silmonite. And so in this case, because to me, this is a good example of a reaction texture, this would be a spot where under the IGMET tab, under the third subtab, this reactions, we can put in this information, right? Where we have a breakdown, or it seems like that kyanite is being replaced by silmonite. And then for me, I always write a lot of notes of things of go and check this with a thin section once we're back from the field. Okay. And in this area as well, there was really interesting intrusive relationships. So another field photo from nearby to that metapelite in this case, you can see kind of the main feature that's probably grabbing your eye is this metadiorite dike that's cutting across. It has a leucosome that's in the center of that dike. And then what it's intruding are really finely layered quartzite that you can see nicely below. And within that quartzite, we also have leucocratic material that's strongly deformed. And what was interesting for us too is that the quartzite appears to be kind of bending into that dike. So there's a lot of interesting textural information within this outcrop. And so this was one spot where I wanted to take more detailed notes. And so I have under the images tab now, I have this information kind of documented in the photo, but I wanted to kind of better annotate it. And so this was what Basil was describing earlier with kind of sketching is there's several options where you could go in and annotate this photo within Strabospot. What I found with an iPad mini is that when I would click on the sketching within the photo, it zooms in to such a scale on the photo that it was hard to document anything. So I tried out the sketching tool. So either you can click it here under sketch or up in the top right corner, you'll see kind of a pencil. And so then you can draw in whatever you want and sketch in information. Please don't judge me for my, what appears like a 2-year-old could draw this, but it's just getting across the general information. And I was doing this with my finger. Again, if you're going to be doing a lot of drawing, I do recommend having, you know, some sort of fine tip stylus, like an Apple Pencil or something with you to be able to do detailed annotations and drawings and that sort of thing. But you do have lots of options, and then also using, as Basil said, those third-party programs like Sketch and others. The other thing, just to highlight, kind of in this area, we did want to collect samples of some of the different rock types within this individual kind of photo, if you will. So this was a chance where you could make that photo into a base map. So again, we're still under the images tab, and then you just click on image as base map. Once you do that, you'll be able to then click on the map option. And once you click that, that will take you back to kind of your main menu, like it would normally be your satellite image or your topographic map. But in this case, it's the photo that you had, and then you have all the same options that you would have for the map area, where you have your spots, you have your line tool, the polygon, and then the ability to edit those. So this is kind of a nice way to map out individual things within a single photograph. So in this case, we wanted to collect a sample of the metadiorite dike. So I placed one spot onto that dike. And the overall outcrop I had named 22. So I called this spot 22A. And so now you have kind of all your normal spot information. So under samples, I could go in and enter in that sample name that we were collecting it for geochronology and all the rest of kind of the normal information that you'd want to put in for a sample. And then we could go back to the main photo again and add in more spots. And so let's say we wanted to also collect a sample of this leucosome that's cutting across the dike, or that's in the center of the dike. We could call that B, and again, enter in kind of the same information under that now individual spots. And we could place a third spot for the quartzite. And what's nice is, again, all of this is kind of nested under kind of one larger spot that allows you to then tie in very specific information about your sample, or this is a way to kind of tie in the orientation information directly to that sample. And that sort of kind of allows you to be more specific, I guess. So those are a couple of examples of how we used it at different localities for different features. And just one thing that I found really nice with using this for a week in the field is just the overall spots menu. So this is back under the 3 horizontal lines, and you can just click on spots. And so once you've been working, obviously you'll have a large number of spots that you're accumulating through time. And I found this to be really nice because it lists out which spot localities have orientation measurements, which ones have images, as well as samples. And so this is a very quick way to get a sense of, oh, I haven't taken an orientation measurement for the last 3 outcrops. I should really make sure to do that at this next one, you know, and just gives you that sort of information a lot more easily than kind of a traditional field notebook would be, where you're flipping through and trying to read through your notes. Yeah. So that's kind of overall what I wanted to say of how we used it. One thing I would do differently in the future is we had 3 different people using Strabo, and we all set up our own accounts and our own projects. And then when we got back from the field, it was difficult to try to share that data in terms of sharing it across Strabospot. We could, of course, download it and share it in that way, but if you want to keep it all in one Strabospot project, what we were talking about yesterday is probably the best way to do that is to set up an account for the group, which does mean having that, you know, unique email address that goes with the account, because the email address can't already be registered. So you'll need to set up an account maybe for your lab group or your class or whatever it may be. And then under manage projects, make sure you're all under the same current project. And then you can set up these different data sets, and you can have as many data sets under the project as you want. And so it seems like this is probably the easiest way to set it up, so that each person has their own data set, that they're all linked together under one project. All right, so that's all I have. I'm happy to take any questions, but hopefully this gave you a sense of how you might want to use it in the field for at least metamorphic rocks and their petrology, as well as their fabrics.
Stacia, that was great. Thank you very much. So what I'm going to suggest is that we go on a little bit of a break here so we'll reconvene at well, 1:55 Central Time, so 5 minutes before the hour. So you've got, you know, a 7-minute break here. And in the meantime, Stacia can answer questions, and they'll be recorded as well. So you can always come back to those. So if you need to get a beverage or something, this is the time. And otherwise, we'll just, Stacia will take questions. I'm going to ask a question. Drew, you also used it. Do you have any other thoughts that you want to add to what Stacia talked about?
Let's see. I had a list of things that I made the other day after coming back from the field. But now that you put me on the spot, I can't think of.
Well, you know what? Don't worry about it. We'll just wait and see if anybody has questions of Stacia.
Okay.
So perhaps there can be different levels of access for project editor, administrator. That's an interesting idea. We have not talked about that at all. So that, if you could write that into Google Docs, I think that's an interesting idea. The only thing we've talked about for different project level is sort of a student level. But yeah, it's an interesting idea. Stacia, how long before you really felt comfortable? Was it sort of a matter of days? Was it a matter of hours?
I'm not gonna lie, probably the first half to full day, I was kind of annoyed by Strabospot. And just felt like it was taking so much longer than it would for a field notebook. But I think a lot of it was that initial feeling that I needed to fill out every single box that's available in Strabospot. And once I got comfortable with ignoring a lot of things and just using the menus that I wanted to use, then I felt kind of a lot better about it.
So then answering Joe's question, sort of by the end of the week, how long did it take to do an individual spot? And do you think it was faster or slower than a field book at that point?
I think that's a really tough question to answer because it just depends on how much information you're trying to collect at the outcrop. Where I would say we were with a colleague, Andrew Zuza, who does a lot of mapping, and he was moving through the outcrops quite quickly while still taking notes. And whereas, you know, I'm a lot more detailed person, and so I was sitting there and kind of observing the rocks and writing things as I would go. But in the end, I would say it was still maybe a little slower than a field notebook, but I think that's mainly because I just am a slow typer, which I assume I'll get faster at through time too. Yeah.
Tim asked the question, did you use the compass tool for orientation data, or did you use a Brun?
I used the compass tool the entire time, except for the very first outcrop, because I was curious and wanted to satisfy myself. I did use both to check and make sure that it was coming up with the same numbers. One thing, we were having some problems that I have been meaning to email Basil and Doug about, where on some of the lineation measurements, it was 180 degrees off. And we couldn't figure out what was controlling that. And it just seemed to be certain outcrops that were like that. But it was pretty obvious for us because we always knew the fabrics or the lineations are kind of west northwest. But I could see for a student, if they weren't paying attention and got something going southeast, you know, they would just mark it as okay.
Yeah, fair enough. So yeah, did you use a full iPad?
I just used a iPad mini because I find those a little easier to lug around. And then I do have it, I'm holding it up if you can see my video. I currently have it in a waterproof screen or case and that sort of thing, but that's mainly because in the North Cascades, it can rain a lot there. And I just live in fear of throwing it in my backpack and a water bottle coming loose and being devastated for it breaking.
I'll just second that almost everybody who's gone to use these goes to the iPad mini in an OtterBox or equivalent case. Some people don't go for the OtterBox because they want the stylus, but they tend to be doing less sort of backpacky kind of field work.
Yeah, and I brought an Apple Pencil with me. I didn't end up using it just because in the end it wanted to be connected to the iPad, plugged into it, and with the case on, I couldn't do that easily and didn't want to mess with it in the field.
And there was an issue of the screen in the sun. Did you have issues with being able to see, or could you shade it?
You could shade it most of the time, just being at the right angle or kind of hugging up against the outcrop where you'd have a little bit of shade. I mean, it is quite bright in Nevada. Yeah, the only time I guess I found it challenging was sometimes with taking photos where, you know, there's only so many places you can stand to take your photo, and sometimes you are in the sun and it can be challenging. I don't know, Drew, you can probably speak to some of this part too. Did you have any problems with that if you're still on?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I would say, I think the hardest thing with seeing a screen in the sun is if you're trying to share your screen with somebody else. But I think for the most part, you can kind of figure it out, like huddle it, you know, under your chest or something. But it wasn't too bad. It's definitely not a showstopper.
I will add quickly that they do make kind of matte screen protectors that really reduce glare and help in sunny environments.
Okay, so I'm gonna keep us on schedule. Thank you once again, Stacia, for doing that. And I think we're gonna move over to Frank now, who's gonna talk about his experiences with that. Frank, are you ready to go?
Yeah, pretty much. Can everybody hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, that's good. I think I'm going to turn off my video. You don't need to look at me. Let me see if I can get the screen sharing going here. Let's see here. How do we do this? Oh, there we go. Now I have to. Oh, brother. Right. Hold on a second. Should have tested this before. Share.
There we go. I see US route.
Okay, US Route 5. Okay. Yes, well, okay, I'm Frank Spear, and for those of you who don't know me,
Okay, Frank, just
my
a second.
involvement.
We have your as presenter mode, so we see it on the side as well. If you wanted to go to full, you might go to presenter mode. Yeah, perfect.
How's that?
Good.
Are you seeing the correct screen?
We are, and it's a little bigger
I've got
now,
two
so that's
screens
good.
going here. Okay. Yeah, I've been involved with Strabospot for a number of years here, sort of as a metamorphic consultant, but also because you know we've developed this database for metamorphic rocks called MetPetDB, and one of our goals is to figure out how to integrate that with Strabo. We haven't done that yet, but that's in the future. I only had access to the most recent version of Strabospot to play around with it with the metamorphic and these tabs for about a week ago. And so I thought I would, you know, basically go over some of my experiences trying to, well, going through a virtual field day and show you what I learned about it. Now, Stacia just did an absolutely superb job of showing you all the various different features that Strabospot has that might be pertinent to metamorphic rocks. If you're anything like me, you're probably sitting there saying, "Oh my gosh, there's so much in this app." It looks like well, first of all, it'll take me a long time to learn it, and secondly, it'll probably slow me down in the field. And that was a concern of mine. And one of the things I thought about as I approached this exercise here. But I don't think it's that bad. I think it's actually great. And one of the main message here is that you currently have a workflow that you use when you go in the field. And I think Strabospot can accommodate it, but figuring out exactly how to do that is, you know, it takes a little bit of practice. So anyway, I'm going to show you what I did with this outcrop here in Vermont. This is the very first outcrop I ever sampled in August of 1973. I have to give a huge debt of gratitude to Doug Rumble, who's out there in the participants, who told me about this outcrop. And I went out and sampled it one afternoon. This is just one of the outcrops, one of the rocks there along this particular road cut. But anyway, just to put it in context, here it is in eastern Vermont. Here's the geologic map, and this outcrop sits right there along the Connecticut River. Now, in 1973, here are the field notes I took. I did make a sketch map, sort of the outcrop with samples labeled here, and then annotated them to some degree, but not in terms of rock types. And I want to say that my workflow, especially back then, was basically collect as many samples as you can. I was working on phase equilibria and pressure temperature things, and it really didn't matter. Well, I wasn't dealing with structures at all. I'll just be honest about that. And exactly where the sample was from wasn't as important as just having as many different rock types as I could get my hands on. So that was the overall field goal, is to get a lot of rocks with different bulk compositions. When we finally did publish this back in 1982, this entire outcrop showed up as basically one dot on the geologic map. So that's where we were. And I can't resist showing you at least one sample from here, because these are amazing rocks if you ever go there. You see the garnets and the hornblende. What you can't see at this scale is that the hornblende is intergrowed with Cummingtonite, and some of these blady crystals down here and elsewhere are intergrowths of anthophyllite and gedrite. So this rock has 4 amphiboles and garnet. They're rather amazing. Okay, so this is the level of granularity that that we were worried about back in 1973, and Strabospot is terrific for handling that. There's the Strabospot field-based map, and it's easy enough to put a sample down, spot down there, and get it located. Stacia showed you all different ways of locating things and so on. The question, though, that I had to address was, well, I have over 25 samples from this outcrop. So what's the best way to get 25 samples into one spot? Well, one way is just to take notes. You can just say, 25 samples at this locality, fill in details later on. What I'm thinking about here is, when you're going on some of these field traverses and your objective is to sample as much as possible, you want to take as little time taking field notes as you can, because you want to get as many rocks. I mean, for example, if you were let off by a helicopter on the top of a mountain, and they're going to come pick you up in an hour, and you simply want to get a lot of samples. Well, so how do you use Strabospot in that context? And one way was just to put down something in the notes. Another way is to take the one spot and to add samples. You can add individual samples to that spot. You can have as many samples as you want, as far as I know. I do not recommend this approach. And the reason are things that were talked about yesterday and Stacia alluded to. It's that all of the things that go under this IGMET tab relate to spots. They don't relate to individual samples. For example, here's the IGMET tab for this one spot here. And if you want to specify the rock type, the protolith and other things, or the minerals, they're all going to be the same. There's no way you can, impart these individual characteristics to specific samples. And that's just the way it's designed. I don't think that's going to change, but it's good to know, because if, otherwise you're going to find yourself in a bind. Additionally, I think when we see what happens with Strabo Micro, which you're going to see, I guess, in a day or two, you'll see that the information is related to specific samples, and so you want to keep your samples, all the information to a sample related to a specific spot. So the issue is, if we're going to take 25 samples and we want to annotate them all with some kind of characteristics, we need 25 spots. Well, that's kind of a pain to sit there and just take 25 spots, but there's a great option in Strabo, which I don't think anyone's talked about yet. But it's called, if underneath this 3 dot menu in the upper right here, it's called copy this spot. If you click that, you get a copy. So I start with the first one, which I took with the GPS, then you copy it and you can get another one and you give that a sample number and so on. So now each one of these samples, you can put all the attributes of the particular rock to that particular spot. And it's quite fast. Now they'll all have the same GPS coordinates, but that was exactly what we had in originally. So we basically used Strabospot for a 1973 level field sampling expedition. Now, in 1993, Doug Rummel and I went out, we ran a field trip to this outcrop, among others. And so I went back beforehand and I sketched out the outcrop in some detail. So, had I been a little bit better field geologist in 1973, I might have done this. And again, I located the samples based on the different, specific outcrop along this road cut. There's a lot of poison ivy there, and we had foreign people from other countries that had never seen poison ivy, so it was good to annotate that. But each one of these outcrops and each one of these numbers actually has several samples associated with it. And so, how do you deal with that? Well, Stacia showed us, and others have showed us. But here's, I'll just show you again. Here's one of those outcrops. This is 7319. It's this one here. So that's what it looks like. And all of these images I'm showing you are actually done with Google Maps. The picture of the road cut and the street view. And so this is the street view of this outcrop. And I thought, wow, this is a better picture than I could have probably taken myself. Anyway, this is one of the sample locations. And so what I did was I went through and I found each one. Yeah, easy enough to do. And you take a location for each one. Now, if I had been doing this in the field, I would have just gone to the spot and taken a GPS coordinate. But eventually you end up with a bunch of spots that have a considerably more granularity with respect to where the samples are from. And then you get, well, then you can do something which I think is a place where Strabospot really, really shines. And it's what people have talked about before, but using an image as a base map. So you're in the field, you take a picture, in this case it's a Google Maps screen grab, but nevertheless. And when you do that and set it as a base map, you get this map icon. And this map icon, well, you click on that and then you get the picture with all of the Strabo tools over on the left. Stacia showed you examples of this as well. You grab the spot thing, you put down a spot, and you can give it its own sample number. So doing this, you can achieve whatever level of granularity you're interested in. And yeah, well, anyway, it's one of the places where Strabospot really, really shines. So that's it. That's what I was able to do last week. My 2 cents worth, basically these notes here just reiterate what I just said. Using photographic base maps is really where Strabospot shines. But I do have one word of advice, and that is practice with either the online or tablet versions and design a sampling strategy before you go in the field. It can be very frustrating at first, but if you have a good idea of what you're trying to achieve, and as Stacia said, once you begin to ignore all the multitude of things as being not necessary for that particular day's work, it's actually very, very fast. And I honestly believe I could have collected the data that I collected just about the same amount of time using Strabospot as I did using a field notebook. Okay, well, thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Frank. In the interest of time, I'm going to suggest that we go on, and Nick cues up the Strabo 2, so you'll see an even faster way of going. Please ask questions of Frank in the chat window so that he could answer those. And again, that's also a useful record for us. And I think with that, Nick, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Awesome. So I'm going to show you a preview of a second version, second iteration of the Strabospot field app. And the second iteration focuses entirely on the user interface. So it has the same backend that the data structure that Strabo 1 has, but it's been redesigned specifically with a fast field data collection with several workflows in mind. And we had a lot of discussion, the PIs and the programmers and those of us helping on this project, about how we wanted to allocate programmer resources. And what we decided was, looking at who is using Strabo and how they're using it on what devices, that this second version of Strabo is going to be iPad only. So it's iOS only, not supporting Android. Although we are still writing it in a framework that would be in the future possible to port over to Android, but the initial release is going to be iPad only. And the reason to go with iPad is, first of all, it's by far and away the most common device using Strabo today. And we can by committing to using iPads, we can design specifically with that extra real estate in mind. So the redesign, as I said, focuses entirely on UI, or user interface, for field data collection. It has exactly the same data structure. And so when I demo this in a few minutes, I'll actually be demoing it on a little dummy project that I made in Strabo 1. It's completely compatible with any data that you create now with the existing Strabospot application. And it's designed to take away a lot of the form input that comes at you kind of on the right up front in Strabo 1. So it's designed to make data collection fast, intuitive, and importantly, entirely map focused, or image-based map focused, if you're working on a scale that Frank was just showing, and flexible for different workflows. And so it's currently under development. it's been under development for about 18 months, and we're aiming for a public release on the App Store in later this year. And just to give a little bit of historical context, the Strabo app that you've been using and we've been showing this week was designed really with to put the database up front for the user so that we could test the data structure in the field, go through and see if the data logic made sense. But it was not as much designed for making data collection really fast and convenient in the field. We built in the later versions of Strabo 1, we did develop some aspects of Strabo 1 that sped up, like the copy spot and things like that. And this second version is entirely about what the geologist experience should be in the field. So this is what it looks like. This is on an iPad, and there are a series of buttons lining the edges. And so there's all the settings and preferences are located in one area. Different map actions like lassoing, zooming to the spot extents, and lassoing structural measurements for Allmendinger SteriNet program, controlling which map symbols show up, controlling the base maps and overlays, showing your location, the points, lines, and polygons tool that you are familiar with. And then the big new thing is that spots now, instead of taking the whole screen, are shown in a notebook view that both summarizes all the data you've collected in an overview page, which is not shown here. And then there are data entry similar to the tabs that bring you to specific structural measurements or samples or tags, notes, pictures, etc. And whether you're in the settings and preferences, or, and sorry, this is a typo, or in the notebook view, you never lose sight of the map. So in Strabo 1, sometimes if you have found yourself deep down through several menus, you can find it a little bit disorienting where exactly in the app architecture you are. And here you are always just simply a tap away from getting right back to the map, and the map is always interactable. A final thing that we've done in Strabo 2 is something that we're calling shortcuts, and it's direct data collection meant for campaign style data collection, where you never, you can take measurements, samples, notes, and pictures without ever opening the notebook view or interacting with the spot structure. And what happens is when you collect data in these little views, Strabo 2 will automatically create point spots at your current location to house the data that you're collecting. And at any point, you can go to the last spot created to enter that spot and continue editing, or go back to previous spots that you've created in this campaign mode and add information to them. So it's a way to collect data really fast. It's a much more lightweight than entering the notebook page and adding all kinds of information if all you're trying to do is collect a bunch of strikes and dips or collect a bunch of samples. And I'll demo that. So I'm gonna come out of this and I'll show you the development version of Strabo 2. Switch to my iPad.
While Nick is switching over, I'll just take this opportunity to say two quick things. First is Nick is our main person working as the design interface. So in addition to being a structural geologist, it turns out he's just relatively talented at this, and the others of us are less so. And it's a totally different skill set, and it's great he has it. So that's one thing. But the second thing is that the Strabospot 2 you're seeing, it's being designed for geologists. So the ones that a structural geologist would use, Metamorphic use. And so be thinking about that as Nick's presenting. Go ahead, Nick.
Yes, that is actually a fantastic point. So this version of Strabo 2 is being developed entirely from a structural geology perspective. And our idea is that actually the metamorphic and igneous petrology are the next in line that will be kind of most easily integrated into this Strabo 2 application because the workflows are the field workflows are relatively similar. But the shortcuts that we're showing, yeah, that's entirely on the structural geology side, because when we started designing, that's kind of where we were at with the data structure as well. Okay, so I have, you should be able to see my iPad screen. A couple things to just review. So on the left, there are the map layers, and you can switch between, you know, the macrostrat geology, all the same things that you can do in Strabo 1. I've uploaded that same DEM that I just gave an example with a few minutes ago. So we can do a DEM overlay, and we can go into settings and preferences. This has all the same content as the 3 pancake or the hamburger 3-bar tool in Strabo 1. It's been reorganized though to be a little bit more clear. And so there's your account information and the ability to load and download or backup projects. There's information about the active projects and the ability to, for example, add another data set. Uploading and downloading projects, and then things like the spot list and the image gallery. And so, for example, we have everything that Strabo 1 has for image base maps. So we can look at an image base map, and that you can see I've done one structural measurement of a fold hinge there. But at no point when you're going through the settings does the map disappear. It's still completely operable. So if you're doing a setting that kind of, and you want to refer to the map, you can still use the map there. Okay, so the basic workflow for adding a spot, I click down on that spot, point spot, I can add a spot, the notebook page pops up, and I have tools down at the bottom that allow me to add data. So I can say I want to take some structural measurements, and I'm moving my iPad around. On the Zoom, it's probably a little bit stuttery, but it's smooth and it responds to the gyroscope. So there's some visual input. And to take a measurement, I can take a planar measurement, a planar and linear measurement simultaneously, or a linear feature only. So I'll take a planar measurement, and if I tap, you can see that that data is populating in the right-hand column. And one thing that makes Strabo 2 much faster is that I can actually, after I've taken these, I can bulk identify them. So instead of identifying each measurement one at a time, I can click right here where it says identify all to the right of planar measurements. And I can say, well, all of those measurements that I just took are foliations, and I'll call them a nice exfoliation. And I can put in as much metadata as I want about those, and I can say save. And now all of those have been bulk categorized as nice exfoliations. So this allows you to take many, many more measurements in a single spot, and then not have to worry about clicking through each one and putting all the metadata associated with them. And if I go back to overview now, you can see that on the overview page of the notebook, any data that I have collected will start to populate. So there's one central location where I can look at all of my data for a spot. So on the map here, if I were to deselect the spot that I'm on, what populates the notebook page is just the recent spots in my project, so ordered by when I viewed them. And of course, I can click on any of those spots on the map, or I can say, well, I really want to know about this contact that I put in, and I can click that, and it loads up in the notebook page. So the notebook page is kind of for more detail-oriented spots. But we have a way to input data that is quite a bit faster, and that's, I referred to this earlier, the shortcut mode. So over here on the right, there are 4 buttons: a little compass tool, a hammer, picture, and notes. And if I were to click the compass tool, what happens is you have this familiar compass measurement tool, but no spot notebook. And so right now, I have not input any data yet, but if I were to tap the compass to take a measurement, then what you see is it says at the bottom, go to last spot created. So I've just created a measurement at my current location. I'm obviously not here in the field, so it won't create a spot that you can see on the map, but I can go to last spot created, and there it is, the planar measurement that I just took. And now I'm in this spot and I can add as much detail as I want. And when I'm done, I can click down in this window that I'm moving around. It says view in shortcut mode, and I can hop right back into shortcut mode and keep going, and it will create new spots with each measurement that I make. So in this technique, you end up creating a lot of spots with individual measurements. But interestingly, you can do the same thing with samples. So if you're doing a kind of sample campaign and all you want to do is just say names of samples and maybe some sample description, then this would be a good mode for you. You can click the sample name, a description, and maybe you can say it's oriented or it's unoriented, and save sample. And it has created a spot in the background for you that you can edit if you want, or you can just move on and move to another area and just hit, this is sample 2. And another description, and save that. And so now it's created a new spot at your new current location. And if you want to add a structural measurement there, you just tap, go to that spot. These spots are currently for the development version randomly named with human names, so ignore that. The spot name is Sarah, and then, so here it is, here's my sample, but I want to add a measurement because I think there's some structurally relevant information, and I can do that. You could also do that for notes. So if you just want to say, hey, I think there's something interesting here that I want to come back to on the way back to the camp at night, you can just say save note, and it creates a spot with just that note in it.
Nick, I'm going to ask you to, this is great. I think we're getting good comments in the box, but maybe finish up so that we can make sure we get all of Alan's presentation in too.
Yep, so I'm done. That was the last thing.
Great. Okay, well, sorry, didn't mean to abruptly cut you off.
No, no worries, no worries.
So hopefully that gives you enough of an idea that tomorrow when we're talking about it, so for instance, that sampling strategy that Nick showed, I think that's sort of what Frank was looking for when he was doing his work in 1973. So maybe that's something to think about as we go forward. Okay, so Alan's now sharing his screen. I guess by way of introduction, geology has sort of been leading the way on some of this and then incorporating other communities. But there's a huge advantage of going with multiple field communities at the same time because we're all helping each other. And Alan's work is an example of the petrology community getting ahead of everybody else and now helping everybody else kind of move along. And so we're going to hear from him about that. Take it away, Alan. We can't hear you yet if that's an issue.
There, now I'm unmuted.
That's correct, you are.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I want to talk about Strabo tools, which is something that I've been developing on the side with Doug Walker, and it's not part of the main Strabo project, except that we rely on Jason Ash, the programmer extraordinaire, to turn what I've been doing in MATLAB into an app. And so I want to talk about several things that allow you to measure and quantify things in the field that we really couldn't measure and quantify before. So I'm going to just pose a few typical field questions. So I'm an igneous petrologist. I work a lot in granites, and something we try to do in the field is estimate the so-called color index, which is the percentage of dark minerals in a granite like this. Sounds easy. It's actually very hard to do reproducibly and accurately in the field. And so the very first thing I developed was a color index tool, and I'll show you how that works. And you might say, who cares? Well, it turns out this correlates pretty well with bulk composition, and plutons that are zoned in composition are zoned in color index and so on. So if you could do this well, this is a way to map out zoning in the field and get numbers in the field. But we can't do it with our eyes well. So that's my first question. What's the color index here? You might just sort of take a quick look and store a number away in your head. We'll come back to it. Here's another one. Here's a deformed granite. I think everyone would agree that it's deformed, but the question is how deformed? In your notebook, you might write down moderately deformed or strongly deformed or whatever, but that's only semi-quantitative. So it would be nice to be able to put a number on this. Here's another one. Does this rock have a fabric that's a granodiorite? Does it have a fabric that you would put down on your map, that you would measure and put down on your map? So think about that, take a look at that. And that's right. And so now I'm going to go to my iPad. Whoops. Hang on, I have to plug it in. And I'm going to go to some pseudo outcrops here in my home office and solve some of these problems for you with Strabo tools. So I will change the sharing to the iPad. All right, are you seeing the iPad, Basil?
We are seeing the iPad, yes.
Okay, so.
See Strabo tools.
All right, so here is a nice handy outcrop in my office here. So I'm going to take a photo. I'm in Strabo tools. I'm going to take a photo. And I'm going to use that photo. And I'm going to go to the color index tool, and I'll switch that from red to blue. So that's the color index tool. And the basic idea is that you move the slider up and down until you've covered the black minerals, the dark minerals, with the highlight pixels to your satisfaction. You can see there's a problem on this photo because it's kind of dark in the lower left, and if I get, say, the hornblende in the upper middle covered, I've covered a lot of the gray quartz down in the, I said lower left, lower right, where it's dark. So we've actually implemented an adaptive mode that accounts for uneven lighting. And so I'm gonna slide this around, and I kind of think that looks pretty good. I can flip the highlight on and off. Well, yeah, that's pretty good. So it's about 9%. Now this is a photo of an outcrop. I was in the field in March with 6 petrologists, and the numbers we guessed range from 5 to 30. So 9%, I know to just cut the number I originally think in half. And so this gives you a way to accurately, and I think quite reproducibly, get that number. So let's find another outcrop. Oh, here's another outcrop right here of that deformed rock, and I'm going to take a photo. Now I'm going to employ what's called the edge fabric tool. The edge fabric tool gives us an estimate of a strain ellipse for that image, and I'll talk about how we do that in a minute. So you can see that that gives you, in the upper right, you get an azimuth on the screen, doesn't matter too much. The axial ratio of the red ellipse, the blue is just a reference circle. And the trend and plunge of the axis of the red ellipse, the long axis in space. And so if this were a real rock outcrop, this would be actual trend and plunge of that intersection lineation on the surface of that outcrop. That was a lot of brain hurt to get that working, but we got it working. So let's go to this one. Now I know Basil can see the fabric in this rock because I've run this one by him before. This is actually a granodiorite with no fabric that I slightly deformed. So think about what your estimate of the fabric might have been. It's not a great photo. And I actually deformed this. I squeezed it 5% along so that the elongation was at an azimuth of 0.30, and it got an azimuth of about 0.21, which is pretty close. And it got the amount of deformation that I applied to this pretty close. So I'm pretty happy with that. This actually picks up quite subtle fabrics that I think it's very hard to see. So I'm going to go back to my presentation. Sorry about all the switching around here. Share. And go back to here. So the way this works in the field, you just saw it happen. You just hold the device and take a picture with the device parallel to the outcrop that you're photographing, and you get the azimuth on the screen and the actual trend and plunge of that axis in space. So, oops, I'm out of, so how does it work? Well, basically, this is just, I did a lot of reading and thinking, and I came up with this idea, and it seems to work a lot better than I would have guessed. So here for reference is a 50 by 50 pixel image of a couple of lines and a dot. And if you go to each pixel in that image in the upper left, there's a brightness gradient from darkest to brightest. And the length of that gradient correlates with how strong that gradient is. And so in the upper right are those image gradient vectors just laid out, and you can see they're perpendicular to the edges of the stripes and radial around the dot and so forth. So in image C in the lower left, I've translated all of those vectors in the upper right to the origin and rescaled it. And the two black vectors are the principal eigenvectors of the variance covariance matrix. So we have a 1,000 by 1,000 image, you get a 1,000,000 by 2 matrix of the vectors, and you do the Bingham statistics on that, and you get the concentrations of the data. And so those two vectors define an ellipse, and since we want the direction parallel to the edges, not perpendicular to them, we simply rotate that ellipse 90 degrees. And that's the ellipse we're reporting, and that ellipse should correlate pretty well with the strain in a simple system. Now, here's a system where I've got sort of a pebble pattern, and one of these is a slightly deformed version of the other. And I don't think I'll take the time to break and actually do it on the iPad, but this was a 5% squeezing of the pattern, and nobody I've shown this to can even guess which one is deformed, much less which way it's deformed. But this edge fabric determination picks it up very well. And I ask anyone who does structural analysis of this type in the audience, how would you even analyze this with any of the tools we have available right now. I think that would be a very hard problem. So to test this, back when we were first developing it, Doug Walker was in the field in the Mojave in January, and he went to this very strongly deformed outcrop of metavolcanic rocks, and he measured 8 edge fabric ellipses around the sides of this outcrop, and those are the blue circled dots on the stereogram in the lower right. And they define a very nice great circle, and the pole to that great circle is given by the blue square, and the great circle lies under the blue dots. And then he laid his iPad down on the top surface of this outcrop, and he looked down, and there was a red great circle going through the points he had just measured. And he had StereoNet, he plotted these in StereoNet, and the live measurement was on, and that was the measurement of the foliation surface that he had laid his iPad down on. So his eyes bugged out. He said he never would have believed this would have worked so well if he hadn't done it himself. And you might say, well, who cares? What's the point of this if you've got such a beautiful foliation? But just think if you had isolated outcrops in heavy vegetation where there was a weak fabric and you couldn't see the whole picture, but you could measure these edge fabric, the trend and plunge of the edge fabric ellipse at a bunch of outcrops. If they disperse on a great circle, then it's showing you a foliation that you might not have known was there. Here's a classic, this is an example out of the classic Ramsey and Huber Volume 2 structural workbook. It's a deformed quartzite. Ramsey and Huber, if you ever worked through this, did fry analysis. If you've ever done that, you get this dispersion with sort of a non-circular hole in the middle. It's kind of hard to fit an ellipse to that hole, but Strabo Tools does this in 5 seconds and gives you a pretty nice ellipse that I think honors the dispersion on the fry diagram pretty well. Here's one I made up. This is random. These are randomly oriented ellipses with random axial ratios with a slight deformation applied. And you might be able to see the deformation. This is a classic example for doing RF analysis. People hardly ever do RF analysis in practice because you get data arrays that look like this. And it's kind of difficult to see what the answer is when your data look like that. But Strabo Tools in 5 seconds gives you an answer that's very close to the deformation that I applied to this array. The blue ellipse and the blue diamond are the actual applied deformation, and the red corresponds to what I got from the edge fabric ellipse. So that's pretty good. What I think is going to be very useful when we can get out in the field again is the ability to put some quantitative numbers on strain gradients like this. This is a nice shear zone where obviously there's a strain gradient, and you could photograph it and try to describe it, but this way you can at least get some numbers to put on it in the field very quickly. So I'm pretty excited about that example. You can use it for things like quantifying at the micro level, quantifying orientation and strength of fabric of plagioclase microlites in a basalt. We've even played around with things like, and this might be good student projects for looking at jointing. This is around Moab, Utah. And I just zoomed in and with Google Earth and did edge fabric ellipses on the joining patterns, and you can see it quantifies the orientation and the strength of the joining pattern there. I went up a couple of weeks ago to the Blue Ridge and went to a really spectacular Roadcut outcrop of the Blowing Rock gneiss to test something that Doug and I have been frying our brains on for the last couple of months. And make a long story short, we've worked out a way that you can take a lot of edge fabric ellipse measurements and combine them to back out the strain ellipsoid, 3-dimensional strain ellipsoid. So plot on the left is along, well, the red vectors are the long axes of 56 edge fabric ellipse measurements, and the strain ellipsoid oriented in space with its axial ratios is on the right. So that's a work in progress, but I'm very hopeful that that will be a useful tool in structure. And then being a petrologist, I am very excited to announce that I have a new tool that's in beta right now. The tools I showed you up until now are available on Strabo Tools on the App Store, but I want to show you a modal analysis tool, because for structural geologists, the thing that you are supposed to be doing in the field is looking at a granite or something and estimating the percentages of the minerals in it, not, I hope, just because you want to plot it on the Streckeisen diagram, but for more useful pursuits. So here's a nice piece of the Cathedral Peak granite diorite here. And I'm going to take a photo. And of course, I could do the color index of this if I wanted. And you can see it has very little fabric there. But this mode tool in beta does an unsupervised classification of what it sees. And I will tell you, the modal analysis in the right, and the color key is black or the mafics, white is plagioclase, pink is K feldspar, and green is quartz, is remarkably close to an actual modal analysis of the Cathedral Peak granite diorite. We've tried this on a lot of granites, and it's remarkably close, undoubtedly better than you can estimate by eye. And what's really exciting is there are all sorts of mineral relationships that show up when you simplify a very complicated image like this actual photo. When you map it down to just a phase map, all sorts of things show up, like the plagioclase, or like the mafic minerals and the quartz are tightly associated in all of the granites that I've looked at. And in 40 years of looking at granites, I had never noticed that and have never seen it mentioned anywhere. So I'm pretty excited about some of the things that we can do with that. So one last thing is that the science article in GSA Today will be about Strabo tools, although not about this modal tool. And that will be available, well, it will be announced on August 1st, although the paper is actually on the GSA Today website already. So if you're interested in it, take a look at that paper and contact me or Doug with any questions. And I will leave it at there. Thank you.
Alan, that's great. Frank had a question, which is, can you do the same thing with a thin section? Could you do like modal analysis on a thin section using this tool?
That's a more complicated problem because the colors you rely on in outcrop, most of the, well, like in this granite, most of the minerals are colorless. And when you throw in cross polarizer, suddenly all hell breaks loose because the same mineral looks quite different. All this is doing is classifying the pixels using a simple algorithm that seems to work remarkably well. That's doing that on thin sections has been a goal of people for a long time. There are lots of papers that have sort of approached it. You can use it, as I showed, to do things like deformation, but trying to do modal analysis on thin sections is a little bit harder. I will, though, since this is a metamorphic, if I can take just another minute.
Yeah, go for it.
Metamorphic show, I'm going to show you can load a photo off of the camera roll. And our kitchen countertop is this.
Okay, so Alan, we're not looking at a screen. We're looking at you with
there we go.
The golden bear.
Yeah, so this is our kitchen countertop. And you can apply these things to images like this, but you get results that you have to spend a little more time interpreting. So starlights and garnets are black, but the quartz in this thing, you know, and the muscovite are stained by iron. So it's complicated, but the modal tool or simply the color index tool might be useful in a metamorphic context like that. So we're working on it, and we are looking for applications and for people to use these things and give us feedback.
A question about plain polarized light thin sections, and can you tell biotype from hornblende? I don't know that you've looked at thin sections, Alan, so, but do you have an answer for that?
Well, as I say, thin sections are really complicated because, for example, biotite will be, you know, very dark or very light depending on how it's oriented relative to the lower polarizer. Perhaps in unpolarized light, that might work. That's actually something to try. I ought to try taking out the lower polarizer, or just doing a scan on a slide scanner with no polarizer and see, like, if someone has a specific application like that, please contact me and we can work on that. I think that would be great.
Super. So I'll point out that Alan's done a great job on this, but there's a huge advantage of once you share a format that you can use these tools, and that once one person designs a tool, then everybody can use those tools. This is what the geophysicists have been able to do for years. And so we are now in a position where we can start to do this ourselves. So it can be developed in petrology, but used in sedimentology, say. And so, so not only is there a community of people uploading data to Strabo, but there's people developing tools that can be used in interesting and different ways. Alan, we're going to take one question here, which is, in one of your myelinite shear zone photos, you get an aspect ratio of 2 and a seamlessly stretched layer. Have you double checked that with other methods?
No, I have not gone to the trouble of doing, you know, well, I don't have an oriented sample of that shear zone. That was just a photograph out of my collection. I think that is an obvious thing that we need to do. When we deform things artificially, we get the right result. There's an asterisk on that because there's a correction factor that we can talk about later. But what we're finding in a lot of natural samples is that, for example, on the blowing rock gneiss that I showed an outcrop photo of, your eye picks up these stretched out porphyroclasts, and you estimate a pretty large strain. But when you look at it closely, you see that the fabric is actually strongly recovered, and so that it has kind of a granoblastic microfabric, but compositional banding, the remnants of these stretched out porphyroclasts that biases your eye towards a very large strain estimate. And so it was strained very strongly, but the Strabo tools is picking up the recovery as well. So there's a long way to go to see how you use the numbers that you get out of this, but it's at least something.
Yeah, no, I think that's very fair. It might be that the orientations with those fabric analyses are as useful as anything else. Anyway, yeah. Alan, that's great. I'm going to kind of finish this up for today, but I suspect Alan's willing to stay around for a few extra minutes. So if you want to ask him questions after that.
I'm here. I'll actually
great.
Actual video, so have at it.
Great. So I'm just going to remind you, this is a good time to start projects. This will be your homework. For the projects, try and get at least 10 spots in. Just what we're really trying to do is populate the database, but also give you experience doing that. So that's what we'd like you to do, is go ahead and start the project. We'll talk tomorrow about that. On Thursday, just coming up, we're going to ask you to upload that project. Doesn't have to have lots of points, but just enough. And then we're also going to ask you to review the micrograph mode vocabulary, because we'll talk about that and then send it around as an Excel spreadsheet so that you can look and see what we're doing for microstructures and how that could be imported for metamorphic petrology. So the microstructures is not as far along as, say, Strabo 2, but it is happening. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop today. Thank you all for coming for this. Tomorrow, there's going to be a lot of discussions. It's going to be more, what would you like to see in this data system? Are there, changes to the vocabulary that would be useful and maybe more straightforward for people to understand? And also, how can you help Nick get started on the Metamorphic Strabo 2? So what are the shortcuts that you would like? So while you're doing the project, if you could be working on that, it would be very useful to be thinking, oh, if I could only do that, and then tomorrow you can just say, can we just do this? So hopefully that provides some motivation. Do any of the other conveners have anything they want to add? Stacia or anyone else?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I can't think of anything.
Well, super. Thank you all very much. We're going to stick around for a few minutes here so people can ask questions. And otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow at the same time.
Yeah, Basil, I'm still here if anything comes up.
That's great. I'm suspecting people might want to ask you something. Any questions for anybody, for Frank or for Alan or for Nick about Strabo 2? You can unmute at this point. There's few enough of us, I think, that would be fine.
I have a question on the spot function. With the geographic reference, I know that set your location is a good tool, but there is potential for overriding what you already did. So could there be a lock function on that?
That's interesting. That's the first time I've heard about that option anyway, just because you really kind of have to go out of your way to set your location. Nick, has anybody thought about that for Strabo 2? Has that come up in any of the conversations we've had?
No, although the geometry information, so your coordinates, is no longer presented as the first thing you see. You actually have to tap on the coordinates and it brings you to a geometry page where there's an option for you to reset your location. So if the concern is that, that when you create a spot, there's a button on the first page that pops up that says set to my location. We've made that, you won't be able to accidentally tap on that unless you're actually trying to edit your location.
I have a question about the image base maps and how things are stored there. When you take a photograph, this is Frank Spear. When you take a photograph of an outcrop and you put a location on it for a sample, what actually is being stored as the as the location of that spot? I know it's stored in terms of pixels on the base map, but what would the GPS coordinates be for that?
Yeah, it fully inherits the GPS coordinates of the image.
Okay.
Yep. So it gets stored actually with that spot. So it says it'll both have pixel coordinates and geographic coordinates, but those geographic coordinates are from the image.
So they would be, depending on how far away from the outcrop you were, they would not be exact, right?
Right. So if you took like a zoom picture or something, like you were way far away from the outcrop, you could change the location of the spot that contains the picture before you start, adding spots to the picture. That's how I would do that.
Oh, okay, that's a good idea. Could you change it after the fact?
I believe it doesn't live update. So it's when the spot is created, it goes and grabs the geographic coordinates from the spot that contains the picture.
Okay, so you need to change them first and then add the spots. Got it.
Yep.
Well, that's nice. Good to know.
Other questions?
Hi, I was looking at the Excel downloaded data And I noticed that some of the spots that did not have orientation information associated with it has some entries in the Excel file.
Okay, well, that is really interesting news. If you don't mind, Rajiv, could you put that in the Google Docs? And I will also, actually, Noah, you are way more reliable than I am. Will you remember that one or write it down separately? That's sufficiently important that we just need to get on that. So thank you very much. I've
Will do.
just not experienced that.
Sure.
Thanks, Noah.
Sorry, just so that I understand the problem. When you download the Excel sheet, you're seeing.
Yeah, I did not have some spots with orientation measurements, but I do see that on the Excel file. I do see some numbers for planar structures.
So it's added extra spots into your Excel file?
Well, the spots are there, but they did not have an orientation information associated with it, but the Excel file shows that there is.
Okay.
Well, okay, I think we're just going to end it then before 2 hours. Alan, once again, thank you very much for coming on. Those are just awesome tools that you're developing. And I look forward to seeing what else you're going to do with them. All right, everybody, we will talk again tomorrow at the same time. I'm going to probably write to the group just to say who will lead tomorrow. I think it might make sense to switch it up a little bit and maybe have Mike lead that. If Mike, if you're willing to do that for tomorrow, that's just community part of it. That would be great.